It's a book that we found so far to be strikingly relevant. It's filled with verses that are even quoted as bits of wisdom in our pop culture. Right? In modern culture, we know bits of these verses, whether we know them from the Bible or not, like two are better than one, and for everything there is a season, a time to be born, a time to die. There's a time to mourn and a time to laugh. We know these things whether or not we know they're in the Bible. So Ecclesiastes has a lot of relevance for us, and of course that's the case because it's the very Word of God, which is always relevant. We talked about in the beginning about first impressions, and some of the first impressions that you all commented to me about were that, well, first of all, it's kind of a difficult read. Like, what's happening here? The flow of the book seems to be all over the place. And when you read it, it's kind of depressing at first. And then, who's the author? To answer the second question, who's the author, the answer is we really don't know. Initially, it appears as if it's Solomon, and you can find a lot of writers who believe it is Solomon. Chapter 1, verse 1 gives us the words of the preacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. So that obviously seems to be Solomon. But son of David, that phrase can apply to anybody in the line of David. And then you have other verses like verse 16 of chapter 1 where it doesn't appear to be Solomon because this person says, I have acquired great wisdom, surpassing all who were over Jerusalem before me. So this appears to be somebody who's now many years down the line is in Israel as a nation. That would be weird for Solomon to write because there was really only one king over Jerusalem as well, which was David. So that would be kind of weird for him to write. And if it is Solomon, why doesn't he use his name? If that's him, why not give it? Other places it appears as if this writer, whoever he is compiling like bits of wisdom that he's heard from Solomon and from others. So who wrote it? We don't really know for certain. But he calls himself the preacher, and so that's why we refer to him as the preacher, because that's how he refers to himself. And then I also want to address here that other impression that we have, that it's kind of difficult to read. Right? Like at times it's difficult to read or to kind of understand in the flow of it, and it kind of has a strange delivery. And Ecclesiastes is a book, it's part of what we know in the Bible, the Old Testament, as wisdom literature. Okay, it's described as wisdom literature, and so along with the book of Job, the book of Proverbs, and the book of Solomon, they compile this wisdom literature. And so these books, their purpose is to provide insight to the reader in living in a world that God created. So that's the purpose of wisdom literature, to give you insight in how to live in a world that God created. Because God created the world, but the world's been twisted and scarred by sin. The world isn't as it was created to be because sin has twisted it, everything, all of us. So because things aren't as they were created to be, there's a great deal of wisdom that's needed to navigate the decisions of life. And that's where we have wisdom literature. Okay, that's why this is in the Bible. So wisdom literature often provides that insight through different means than what we normally read in other places. Instead of like straightforward maybe teaching or narrative, wisdom literature provides that insight through poetry. It provides that insight through riddles, through wise sayings, through like strong warnings to the reader. One writer says this, that wisdom literature, so those books that I mentioned, Job's, Proverbs, Song of Solomon, and Ecclesiastes, the aim of it is to wound from behind. Now think about that for a second. What does it mean to wound from behind? It's kind of like a sucker punch. Or like, I don't know if you were a kid and one of your dad's correcting techniques when you're out in public was to reach down the table and give you a little scuff up the back of the head. That was a family favorite in our house. So where'd that come from? What's the purpose of it? It doesn't really hurt. It gets your attention. And I think that's a great description of the purpose of wisdom literature and why it is, like, why does it come in such a different direction than what we're used to? So I likened it to stepping on your child's Lego. Right? Like you didn't see it, you weren't looking for it, but once you step on that, it has your full attention, right? I mean, it totally has your attention. So then when you read things like everything is vanity, that's what he's doing. This is the wound from behind. This is stepping on the Lego. Or what use is laughter? What use is pleasure? What good are those things at all? Or even like dead flies, make the perfumer's ointment give off a stench. What is he talking about? What is he doing? It makes you stop and go, what? Because you know how it is with reading, right? You read sometimes, and sometimes you don't even know what you're reading. Just kind of words on a page, you're going through it, and pretty soon you've read 2 or 3 pages, and your mind was drifting. And so wisdom literature is in the Bible to make us stop and think. It's coming at us at a different direction than normally. So we stop and we read that and we're like, what? Or wow, that stings. That kind of hits close to home. Or that's brutally honest. And that's the point of wisdom literature. That's the point. For us to stop and think like that. So in chapter 7, the preacher has a bit of wisdom for us, and we know from the Bible that wisdom is so valuable. In Proverbs, another book of wisdom literature, how much better to get wisdom than gold? To get understanding is to be chosen rather than silver. This is how much the Bible prizes wisdom. Of course, we were like, really though? Wisdom is more important than gold or silver? But think about it, it is. Because if you have a lot of gold, but you don't have wisdom, you're probably going to lose it. That's how we get Nigerian email scammers, right? Like, hey, man, this guy, I've never met him, but he says if I send him $300, he's going to send me $5 million in return. And as crazy as that sounds, they have skimmed hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions of dollars from unsuspecting people in the United States. Thus we have Proverbs. How much better to have wisdom than gold? To have understanding is to be chosen rather than silver. So wisdom is valuable. It's placed highly. It's given a high priority in Scripture. And in chapter 7, the preacher wants us to know that wisdom also gives strength. Verse 19, wisdom gives strength to the wise man. So much so, more than 10 rulers who are in a city. So wisdom is so valuable. It governs thought. It governs right actions. It governs speech. That's what wisdom does. The preacher has a bit of wisdom for us today, and we need to stop and slow down, and we need to receive it. So let's soak it up. Here's the first bit of wisdom from the preacher. First thing for us, death is a teacher. Death is a teacher. Now Brady puts the slides together every week. My son Brady. And he was putting these slides together, and he's like, Dad, that seems a little insensitive. That's what he said. And I love that he said that because it's exactly the point of what the preacher's doing. Death is a teacher. What do you mean by that? Well, look at verse 1. A good name is better than precious ointment, and the day of death than the day of birth. Really? The day of death is better than the day of birth? Verse 2. It's better to go to the house of mourning than to go to the house of feasting. So now remember how we just described wisdom literature. That it's designed to make you stop and say, what? He's doing it right here. We all just stepped on a Lego, right? Like right here. You have my full attention, preacher, because how in the world is the day of death better than the day of birth? And who would ever prefer to go to a house that's in mourning as opposed to a house that's feasting, that's having a great party? The way the preacher does it, it really is that kind of sucker punch that writer talks about, because the chapter begins in the verse, it sounds like a normal proverb. A good name is better than precious ointment. Great. Let's put that on a sign. Let's put that on a pillow. This will be really good in my house. A good name is better than precious ointment. It is all of the makings of a familiar proverb. So really, to put that in modern language, you can, though, apply all the Axe body spray you want. But if your reputation is one that when people hear your name, in spite of the fact that you smell good, if they hear your name and your reputation is one such which they're like, oh wow, her? Or him? If whenever your name is mentioned, it casts a shadow upon the conversation, the preacher is saying, it doesn't really matter what you smell like. That's how the proverb starts. It's the smell of cheap cologne. But that can't overcome a rotten testimony. So this wisdom starts out like we would expect it. A good name is even better than precious ointment. Now, by way of a side note to all of our junior hires here, okay, this is not an either-or thing. Like, have a good name, but you don't need to smell good, okay? That's not what he's saying. Reputation first, but please put on deodorant, okay? So that's free. That's for everyone. That's what he's saying, okay? Reputation first, but it's still okay to bathe well and to smell good, okay? Just so we're all clear. So we're tracking with the preacher. We're like, okay, that makes sense. A good name is even more important than smelling good, because even if you smell good, right, but your name is mentioned and it casts an entire pall over the conversation, what good is that cologne? And the answer is it's worthless. So we're tracking with the preacher, but then he adds this other clause. And so a good name is better than ointment, right? And also, by the way, the day of death than the day of birth. There goes that Lego. We just stepped on it. Because what's he talking about? I'm in hospitals often as a pastor to pray with folks before surgery, for other reasons as well, to visit and comfort in times of loss. One of my favorite things to do in the hospital is to visit new moms and dads and the newborn baby. I mean, that's one of the great privileges as a pastor to do that. And it's one of the most enjoyable things you can do in the hospital. So even in the maternity ward, even when there's a cry out in pain or yelling, typically in a maternity ward, that's all a pain of hope, though. There's hope in that because something wonderful is coming. It's ushering in great joy. You contrast that with tears and pain and perhaps the cancer ward. That's a different thing altogether. So I'm not at first seeing how this bit of wisdom is true. Because when is the day of death better than the day of birth? And how is the house of mourning more enjoyable or more important than the house of feasting? So then, of course, maybe your mind, or my mind goes to the spiritual answer. Well, maybe he's talking about because when you die, you'll finally be with Jesus. Maybe that's what he means. But that's not what he means. All right, that's not what he's talking about. Maybe that's not the view in the text here. That whole thing is not in view. And so I believe what's happening here is exactly what our first point is. He is saying that death is a teacher, that it should be a teacher for us. David Gibson makes this point in his book in Ecclesiastes. Think about when a baby is born. And I still remember the day all my children were born. When the baby's born, there's not much you can say about it. It's just simply that, well, there's a baby. This is awesome. It's my daughter. It's my son. It's my grandson. Right? It's my granddaughter. It's awesome, and there's so much joy. But as a father, you're kind of like, I'm excited to wrestle and play, but you just kind of got to hold them for about 6 months. That's kind of all they do. And they fill their diapers a lot, and that's really all there is. So at birth, there's not much you can say about them. You're looking in those eyes, and what are you going to be? What are your passions going to be? And that's the excitement, the anticipation. What's your future going to be like? What are you going to excel at? What are you going to struggle with? What are you going to love? That's wonderful. But that's all there is. It's at somebody's death that we learn about them. It's at somebody's death that we learn about their life, and when we learn about life, we learn about legacy. So the preacher is saying that death is a teacher. We learn about legacy at somebody's death. We learn about their impact. We hear about their character, their value to their family. So people at somebody's death will say things like they were somebody who never met a stranger. You see how that means something. That he was somebody, she was somebody who would give the shirt off their back to somebody in need. Christ was everything for them. These are things that in death we learn about somebody. Death is a teacher for us. She was the best mom a daughter could hope for. Death is a teacher. You know, in our Western culture, we do almost anything to avoid the topic of our own death. We're fascinated with death in general, but we do just about anything to avoid the topic of our own death. And so everything that is pitched to us is pitched about, like, you know, how it's going to add years to our life. Right? And how 50 is the new 40, right? And things like that. Everything is about escaping death. We are drowning ourselves. We entertain ourselves to death in hopes of drowning out reality. We are so dominated by entertainment that now a reasonable excuse in our culture not to spend time with people or to go to an event is, well, I got a whole queue lined up on Netflix and I really got to get that done. I mean, that's a legitimate, it's not really a legitimate excuse, but it's one that people are like, no, okay. Like, people don't feel ashamed to say, look, I've got 10 episodes still taped on the DVR, and I got to catch up with it. We kind of talk at it like it's work, like it's a responsibility we got. That's how soaked we are in entertainment. And we're trying to just drown out the reality that one day we will meet death. And the preacher is saying, don't do that, because death is a teacher. Look at verse 4. There are two types of people at a funeral. There is the heart of the wise is in the house of mourning, but the heart of fools is in the house of mirth. So what's he saying? He's saying that the fool avoids the topic of their own death at all cost. Get me back to the party as soon as I can. So even at somebody's death, well, let's not talk about their death. Let's just celebrate their life. Let's pretend as if they're not dead. Let's pretend as if they're still living. And let's just celebrate that. And the preacher says, that's foolish. The wise man, the wise woman, to them, death is a teacher. To them, death is a sober reminder that all of us will one day be in that casket. And so then it causes the wise person to think about current choices. So is what I'm doing, what I'm investing in, the time I'm spending on something, will it mean anything at the end of life? It causes us to think, what kind of real world impact is my life having? And this kind of outlook, it isn't morbid. It isn't. It's the opposite. This kind of outlook teaches us that life is precious, that we should live life one day at a time. Now, you say one day at a time, and that's so cliche, but if somebody's genuinely doing it, that's what the preacher wants us to understand about death. That's what death would teach us to do. When you've met somebody who lives this way, it's anything but morbid. Living in this way and allowing the idea that we all have a limited amount of time, and so we must embrace the time we have. It means instead of living life looking off into the future, 50 days till vacation, I just got to survive till I get there. Boy, I can't wait till the kids are out of the house. Boy, I can't wait till I retire. All of those things, we're wasting so many opportunities. The person who lives because they know they're going to die, the person who lives like that, they embrace life. They don't look past the dinner tonight with family. They put down the phone when they're gathered together as a family. Because how many more times are we going to have? So let's embrace this and use it and invest in it. It's the person who, the God-ordained interaction with a neighbor. They don't waste it. For them, death has been a teacher. They know these opportunities are precious, and they know time is short. They don't look past 20 minutes in a car with a friend who doesn't know Jesus. They use it. They're compelled by it. They embrace it. They use it. They're fully invested. This is what a proper view of life and death produces. It produces an urgency that allows us to live. And that's why the preacher is saying that death is a teacher. There is a current song on the radio right now, and it's by an artist named Macklemore. And my kids are probably horrified that I just mentioned his name and that I know who he is, Macklemore. But I keep it lit like that, okay? So my kids know these things, okay? It's called The Good Old Days. And I was listening to it this week. It was on the radio, and I was listening to it. And listen to the lyrics. Listen to the lyrics. I wish somebody would have told me that someday these will be the good old days. I couldn't wait to get older. I couldn't wait to be someone. But now that I'm here, I'm wishing I was still young. I mean, this is exactly what the preacher is talking about in Ecclesiastes. We're always looking to the next event. Like, man, when I get older, when I am somebody, when I can be my own boss, that will be the day. And then when you get there, you begin to look back and think about the opportunities you had when you were young. Missed opportunities. And so death is a teacher. And it's meant to teach us that our time is limited, so invest, embrace it. Now is the time. Live, invest. Let the gospel light shine out for all the world to see. Let death be a teacher to you. That's what he's saying. Here's David Gibson. Only someone who knows how to weep will really know what it means to laugh. Living a good life means preparing to die a good death. So death is a teacher. Here's the second bit of wisdom today. It's a warning. Beware of nostalgia. Beware of nostalgia. Verse 10. Say not, why were the former days better than these? For it is not from wisdom that you ask this. Let me read that again. Verse 10 there. Say not, why were the former days better than these? For it is not from wisdom that you ask this. You see what he's condemning here? It's the good old day mentality, like it was all better back in the day, and now it's horrible. That's a quote right from Thanksgiving dinner, isn't it? Right? That's a quote right from Thanksgiving dinner. The whole extended family gathered. You can tell the preacher when he said he's gone over the entire earth and he's searched for answers. You can tell he's done it because this is us, man. The whole extended family's gathered and discussion ebbs and flows and topic to topic, and eventually it comes up, man, the world's so scary now. Back in my day, there was a time, the good old days. And don't misunderstand me. There is great value in sharing our past with people now, and that's not what he's condemning. In fact, the Bible encourages that. We have a responsibility to talk about our past, to talk about the struggles and how God preserved us and how God carried us through. It gives strength for the current struggles. It gives hope to younger folks who are about to go through them things themselves. So he's not condemning it, okay? Don't misunderstand. There's great value in sharing our past with people. So, I mean, understand this. Kids, let me tell you this right now, you young people. Back in my day, Twinkies didn't taste like a slightly used dish sponge, okay? Back in my day, and people will testify to this, they were filled with trans fat and high fructose corn syrup, and they were glorious, okay? Like, I'm serious about that. You guys are missing out. I remember my grandfather, who was a child of the Depression. They grew up in the hills of Kentucky. And he told me that what they ate daily was lard sandwiches, just bread, and they would spread lard on it. And that's what they lived on for quite a bit of time because they were so poor. So the preacher, amen, Curtis says, yeah, the preacher isn't condemning stories. He's not condemning nostalgia in that way. He isn't condemning memories and sharing memories. We should be doing this. We should be doing more of this. But this is a warning about what a certain type of nostalgia can do. What a certain type of nostalgia can do is it can whitewash the reality of the past. It can only make it like rainbows and unicorns, like everything was good back in the day when it wasn't, and everything now and in the future is hopeless. That's the nostalgia he's condemning. And when we do that, we bring hopelessness on the present and hopelessness on the future. Beware of nostalgia that whitewashes the past, that makes it seem like only back then was everything okay and really good. Beware of that, because that nostalgia tends to also talk about the present and the future as if there really is no hope. Because, I mean, what, God only worked in the past? God can't work now? God's not in control now? That's what a certain type of nostalgia communicates, though, to listeners. Sometimes our words communicate that. And we tend to evaluate past experiences above what they actually were. And in the process, we're wiping away hope for the present and for the future. So, kids these days, right? Back in my day, none of that happened. And boy, I'm really scared for our future because of it. That's the type of nostalgia he's warning against. You know, if we remember about back in your day, a lot of people got polio, right? Antibiotics weren't invented. Black folks could only drink from a certain drinking fountain. The Supreme Court sanctioned nationwide abortion. Women couldn't vote. Right? So there is some nostalgia we should enjoy, but it wasn't all rainbows and unicorns, right? Beware of a nostalgia that whitewashes the past and then looks hopelessly at the present and at the future as if God can't work or God isn't working or God won't work. I want to show you just quickly here what I think is one of the most glaring examples of this type of nostalgia in the Bible. And it's the people of Israel. It's in Exodus chapter 16. We'll put it up on the screen here. This type of nostalgia the people of Israel had it, the type that the preacher's warning against. They've been delivered from their oppressors in Egypt. God has brought them out of Egypt with these massive plagues that broke Pharaoh's will. Then as they get out of Egypt, now they're standing on the Red Sea and Pharaoh's army is crashing down on them and it appears as if they're going to die. Then God miraculously parts the Red Sea and they walk over on dry land and they are delivered. It has now been just a few weeks since that deliverance. Exodus chapter 16. They're in the wilderness and they're starting to grumble. the whole congregation of the people of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. And the people of Israel said to them, would that we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat by meat pots and we ate bread to the full. Do you see what they're doing? You know what were the good old days that were better than this? When we were in Egypt. Because we sat by meat pots and we ate bread to the full. Ah, yes, the good old days of Egypt, when you were slaves, when you were being systematically exterminated by the Egyptians, when Pharaoh ordered all of the infant males put to death. The good old days. The good old days. Are you serious? This is the type of nostalgia that the preacher is warning against. That whitewashes the past and looks to the present and the future as if there is no hope. I'll give you one more personal example. I guess we're on this music kick today, okay? So a couple of years ago, I wanted to introduce my kids to some of the great music of the mid-90s, okay? All right, great music of now when I tell you this band, you're probably going to be disappointed, okay? In the mid-90s, I used to love this country music band called Black Hawk. Okay, anybody know Black Hawk? Everybody's like, no. What's that? No, not Black Sabbath, yeah. I know, there's good music and then there's Black Hawk. And man, to me, that was good music. It was really good music. We used to crank their songs in the car in high school. You need to look them up later if you haven't looked them up. Okay, you need to become, they had deep moving lyrics like your blue might be gray and your less might be more. I don't know what that meant, but it sounded really good at the time. And let's ride the wind down this old road tonight, right? Like, these were great lyrics. And so I downloaded a few songs and I started cranking on the radio, and the kids, to my horror, were not impressed. I believe Aubrey's exact words were, why is that guy always singing about losing his girlfriend? Like, that's what she said about it. And she's pretty right. I think he was Taylor Swift before there was Taylor Swift. Like, now that I think about it, and the lyrics, you look back on it and the lyrics are pretty cheesy, but man, it meant so much back in the day. It meant so much, we loved it. But upon reflection, I think what it is it was more about the time. It was coming of age, and you're driving for the first time yourself without parents in the car, and you got the windows down and the radio's blaring and the wind's blowing, and those are good times, right? Radio's playing, those were good times. But these are good times. Don't cling to the past as if that's all there ever was or will be. These are good times. The wife I have and the family I have, the church I get to serve in. There are such great opportunities now, so I can enjoy that and I can tell them stories, but I'm not going to just cling to it like it's as good as it's ever going to be. I can look back on the past, I can enjoy the memories, I can thank God for them, but I also, as a Christian, believe and know that He is working now, that He's at work, that His will be done, that regardless of what it feels like, He will build His church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. God is working now, and because He is, then I will work. I will be fully invested in the time that I have now. A while back, driving back from Florida through the night when the kids were younger, I was listening on audio to the Chronicles of Narnia, to the series, and to the book on audio. And this is a quote I've often returned to about nostalgia and its real purpose. Here's from C.S. Lewis. It's a quote from The Last Battle. These things, the beauty, the memory of our own past, they are good images of what we really desire, but they are not the thing itself. They are only the scent of a flower we have not yet found. They are the echo of a tune we have not yet heard. They are news from a far country we have not yet visited. So nostalgia in the right place, we understand, we enjoy it. It's a glimpse, it's a taste, it's a smell, it's a sound of what's coming for eternity. And what makes part of nostalgia hard is that those great times had to end. But on the new heaven and the new earth, they will never end. So in its right place, it motivates us to keep serving, head down for the glory of God, knowing that a day is coming when there won't have to be nostalgia, When there won't have to be a time where the good times end. They will just go on day after day after day, century after century, millennia after millennia. That's what's coming, and that's how nostalgia is put in the right place. And that's what the preacher's getting at. So death is a teacher. Beware of nostalgia. And then here's the last one. Wisdom does have limits. Wisdom has limits. So see verse 29. Here's the preacher. He's gone to and fro, right, throughout the entire earth. And this alone I found, that God made man upright, but they have sought out many schemes. One of the things that is common among people, and rightfully so, we want meaning. So we identify with the preacher searching the world over looking for meaning. We want to understand our place in the world, our place in the universe. And the preacher is telling us that he has searched, but he has not found the answers that we are looking for. And so vanity, all is vanity, he says. He also describes wisdom as being so deep that in all of his searching and all of his wisdom, there is no way to get to the bottom of it. Look at verse 23. He says it. All of this I have tested by wisdom. I said I'll be wise, but it was far from me. That which has been is far off and deep, very deep. Who can find it out? One of the things that wisdom can't answer, and you see the preacher struggling with it in this text. But current, limited, human, earthly wisdom, one of the things it can't answer among many things, why do bad things happen to good people? Why does that happen? It's not a bad question to ask. The writers of the Bible ask it. He does. Verse 15, talking about his observations. In my vain life, I have seen everything. There is a righteous man who perishes in his righteousness. And there's a wicked man who prolongs his life in his evil doing. Why does it seem, Lord, that sometimes those who do what's right and honor you, that their life is short and hard? And it seems at times that those who live in total rebellion to you, their life prospers. The preacher is saying wisdom does have its limits. In giving us these bits of wisdom, the preacher wants us to know something else. You are not God. You aren't. You will not have all of the answers to what you see. One of the burdens of wisdom, and we know this, right? Like, one of the burdens of wisdom, the more you know, the more you realize how little you know, right? Like, think about it, like when you talk about a young budding athlete or maybe a musician, and they get going and they're talented and they're gifted and they're beginning to flourish, and it's so cool, but there's also something that's helping them immediately is their confidence, because they don't know a lot yet, and they actually don't know what they don't know. And so they're really going along, and it's not till they continue to grow and pursue that they begin to see, man, there's so much I still have to learn. And one of the things about wisdom is the more you know, the more you learn, the more you realize how little you know. Wisdom has limits. You aren't God. You can't and won't possibly know all that there is to know about what's happening and why it's happening here on the earth, especially this side of heaven. Why does it seem like the wicked excel? That's a legitimate question. It is, right? Like, and the writers ask it. And then I have some other questions that aren't as serious, but they still bother me. Why, as you age, do you have to lose hair on your head, but the hair in your nose really gets thick? That's not fair. I'm asking for a friend, not anybody. Okay, I'm asking for, like, that's not fair. Why do you gain it in your nose and ears and lose it on your head? Why does Philadelphia get a Super Bowl? Like, see, like, these are things we want to know. Okay? Wisdom has its limits. It's okay to ask. It's not okay to demand an answer. It's not okay to accuse God. But it's okay to ask. Every one of the writers do it. When we were talking about this on Wednesday night in our Bible study, you want prayers that you can pray? Go to the book of Psalms. You will see them wrestle with these things and pray these things, and you can pray them. That's why they're there. Wisdom has its limits. It can be dangerous because you begin to think that because you're learning some things, you begin to think that you have the right to sit in judgment of God, that you would make a better God than Him. And you begin to play as if you're God. And then when variables happen in life that you cannot control and you can't see coming for all of your planning, it's earth-shaking. It's humbling. You are not God. No amount of wisdom will ever make that so. You know, one of the ways we see this is in our modern society, all of our technological advancements. And who would have thought the things that can be done now? Who would have thought? So one of the things society has no answer for is the human condition. We don't have an answer for it, not apart from God. There's no answer in our modern culture for the Parkland shooter, that shooter in Miami. There's no answer. In fact, if you notice, like almost immediately, he's just out of the picture. Mental health. The real problem is other things. And one of the reasons why is we have no answers for somebody like that. Mental health is not the problem there. That is not somebody that didn't have the right medication. The planning and the precision it took to carry that out, the ability to then slip out, to exfiltrate with all of the students as they ran out, to leave the premise, that took a great deal of planning. That is not a mental health issue. That is a category of evil that our current culture has no category for, no answer for. Wisdom has its limits. And no amount of wisdom will allow you to atone for your sins. But the good news is that Jesus has atoned for it on the cross. The bad news is there's no amount of wisdom that will allow you to ever save yourself. But the good news is that God has made a way of salvation through Jesus Christ, and that way of salvation is offered to you. Be wise enough to admit you're lost. Jesus has come to seek and to save the lost. Let's go to the Lord in prayer.